Pre-IR. An undesired spiritual happening and its scenarios in the outcome. 1.1 What is a spiritual happening? To my understanding and personal experience, a spiritual happening is a moment in space, time, on or in one's temple, that an awareness of non-realities or non-natural feeling is observed by one's entity. 1.2 What is an undesired spiritual happening? An undesired spiritual happening is a spiritual happening that roots from evil and is performed by a weak being or person into one's reality and awareness of all entity. The encounter of this leads one to have brief and long time suffering. 1.3 The root and performer of an undesired spiritual happening. The root of this deed is called evil, for it was forbidden by the Creator of mankind in heaven to be performed under unlawful manners according to His will for humankind. The character of the performer of an undesired spiritual happening is called weak because they are only two possible paths could have lead them to perform a wicked deed. One path is that the performer of this undesired spiritual happening wicked deed was lead into temptation due to their low understanding of reality and the laws and word of God. The other path is that the performer of this deed is one who feeds on the suffering and the souls of their victims. 2.1 Reason why one experiences an undesired spiritual happening. There are so many factors to be considered in this matter, but a few of the most important ones are: first, that sometimes the victim's deed not do anything to deserve their fate, and the other parties are solely accountable for the undesired spiritual encounter in their lives. 2.2 Second, there is a time when one is lead into temptation and his or her goodwill of God becomes weak, chooses to seek things above nature that are too hard to understand what they are meant for and how they work out when they are attained in a way of living and on the long scale of one's existence throughout the creation that they are as a being. And once one starts to practice this natural deeds for the wrong reasons or performs them wrong, their actions is returned to them by default. With what's called bad karma, what rooted from a God-given right and what can be understood a law of nature of creation regarding on what's above the natural end. See Genesis 12.3. 3.1 Scenario 1 and the outcome from an undesired spiritual happening. There come a time when an undesired spiritual happening happens and the victim gets drained of all of their spiritual strength in a part of their entity, and this causes them to suffer from outside into their souls even though they are functional by the help of medication or meditation. Their suffering is into the awareness and reality, and some are put to a literary halt and all that they are able to do is exist in non-ending as in continuing suffering by the second from the time as observed. And the victims of this scenario have to be helped with everything that they do in their daily life, from preparing their daily meals to making sure that the victim of this undesired spiritual happening has a continual place to sleep. 3.2 There are two outcomes from such a spiritual happening. To my own understanding of God's creation and its laws is that might have this been a deserved lesson from God, then the victim's fate is rooted to a path that the victim shall be cured of their burden and they shall once again function according to society. And that shall be the end of their spiritual journey in an undesired way. 3.3 The other outcome is that the victim was a prey to the perpetrator as explained in 2.1 and they got caught up in a bad situation which lead to their encounter with an undesired spiritual happening. To my own understanding of God's creation and its laws is that the victim also in this outcome shall be cured of their burden and they shall once again function according to society, shall be compensated by our Creator God by the law that He already assured creation at its beginning and at its non-natural spiritual factors revealings to natural realms of the human in the flesh. God did this when He gave His creation the ability to be able to have knowledge to perform a spiritual above natural act into reality. 3.4 The default react fate to the UN God lawful grounded action is rewarding the suffering that one encountered at the placement of what's known as a curse which caused them to be awakened to what's above the natural to their perpetrator in to space, time and temple by God and His functionality of nature, for creation, space, time, and temple is one with its Creator. 4.1 Scenario 2 and the outcome from an undesired spiritual happening. There are times when an undesired spiritual happening takes place and the victim is known as what can be understood as a collector of bad-spirited beings to be a part of the deliverance of these unhumane people or people that are no longer to be observed as people for they forsake our, their Creator and therefore are existing and walking a blind path that can only lead to one final destination. To a place known as hell to the believers of the faith of Catholicism. 4.2 4.2 A place known as hell to my own understanding is in time right here right now for each being individually. We all make up our havens and heavens, and so do we find our own salvation on the path to hell of the never-ending therefore entire existences. Therefore to my understanding of God's creation regarding the temple in space and time, what can be understood as its existence, the entire never-ending of one's entity, nor the physical of one's current entity. 4.3 A collector is one known as a self-righteous man or righteous woman or a wise one or elder one or a wise guy. The collector is one who was born into a life of spirituality and or studied a few or enough spiritual awareness and practice to walk themselves back home where they belong with no charges on the breaking of the laws of our creators against his creation. 4.4 When the collector encounters an undesired spiritual happening, it is known that they are to seek understanding to the root of their current state in their existence. Then pre-aware of their final fate of their current state in their existence, they seek understand and cause, obtained, nor obtained, they give their current fate a place in their understanding and functioning, therefore leaving them less harm than the usual victim. 4.5 For the collector has spiritual awareness and choose to educate their perpetrator on each encounter for a long period of time. They abuse their perpetrator and take advantage of the stupidity of the being or person God that they build up an ego and place themselves above God and the laws of nature, the laws of understand, the laws of logic, and to place themselves above another with no cause. 4.6 The collector from personal experience, when their spiritual world gets compromised, first they thank God for the duty they have been given to separate God's good and evil, for God is the judge of all, yet but what is of one individually in God, one gets to judge how they are to be placed into his, God's, our Creator's existence. 4.7 The collector is to sustain strength and all desired by never deserting the goodwill of God in them. Throughout their undesired spiritual happening, the collector abuses their perpetrator by self and God righteousness and his laws of nature regarding them what is above the natural. The collector sets his perpetrator up for a higher pay than the usual, for the collector does not use force and chooses God will of allowing nature and thereof to take place. 4.8 The outcome of an undesired spiritual encounter by a collector is that throughout the time that the collector was keeping trust in God and got so angry that the collector chose to become an abuser of his victims because they indeed do know what they are doing for God, Moses, Jesus, a few priests, many other men of God, and the collector individually did indeed place their abuser on notice of the fate and the sin wherein whose they found themselves. For this reason the perpetrator at the final destination of the undesired spiritual happening ends up paying a price that they never had put into consideration. 4.9 For their big little egos filled with pride leads them into blindness and so clearly in denial that they continually refuse to see the outcome of their actions regarding themselves and another. 4.10 For many collectors became schemai due to their unlikeness of the cruel acts that they then counted and came to be considered as the men and women from the natural law that are known to be able to use God's law and individualism rights to their every need. 5.01 From personal experience, one collector was righteously able to collect/claim an entire existence of their undesired spiritual burden. The claimant was a collector had established a personal faith that was under the universal official faith Catholicism. The perpetrator used the main factors of the collector's personal faith and had practiced evil deeds on the temple of the collector. Due to the protocols of the collector's faith, he charged the perpetrator's act on admission. One day before exactly 2 months, the collector was forced into offering the perpetrator one of the personal faith's manifesto protocols contract. One of the main factor of that personal faith's manifesto protocols contract was that the collector was to take over the right of guidance to the perpetrator's existence. This personal faith's manifesto protocols contract is bound by the fact that the perpetrator was aware of what spiritual path was being sealed at the time frame that it was offered and accepted by the perpetrator through his actions regarding the undesired spiritual burden. Conclusion. Are you the age to attain and handle the basic knowledge about spirituality? Be very careful about yourself before you start your spiritual journey. For even though you do get what you want and might have thought that you needed, and your undesired spiritual deed, indeed lead your enemy to suffer, there will always come a reaction out of your deserved action, and may it be so that you do the same thing a long time to your fellow brethren under God, then your existence, and that is a time beyond your current physical form, shall hold a automated reaction to your being, to to your unique identity and creation of one. Some, if not many, in our current timeline in God's creation are blessed to get guidance to the Word of God's or to the most important factors of way of conduct to our fellow brethren. If so that you were able to learn where you and everything around you roots from, and you do have interest in exploring the spiritual above natural, I do advise that you do keep it simple as possible. The best simple way that I know of keeping to yourself when it comes to spirituality practice, for a spiritual deed is bounded with a lot of other things that one must always be aware of before including another. And no matter what your current state in your existence, and whatever you choose to do regarding any kind of spirituality is that you do always hold the word, love, and will of God in you. Know God, always wherever you are and whatever your state of one is, know that our Creator is a loving God, a God who has mercy in abundance, a God who is strong in judgment to that what is against to the best any can think of to those who know of Him. Kind regards. Panic Comedy.
Stars Melody. Stars Melody. Stars Melody.
Now you know, I is sweat on pepper panic common yire.